The bell above the diner door jingled, and the room seemed to pause, as if the very air had shifted. Mia looked up from the counter, where she was frantically scribbling down an order. Her eyes widened as a man strode in, his boots clicking against the worn linoleum floor. It wasn't just anyone. It was the American icon, the steely-eyed legend her late father had admired, whose movies they'd watched together on countless quiet nights. Mia's heart skipped a beat. She almost dropped her pen, but years of working double shifts had trained her hands to keep moving, even when her mind was reeling. The American icon moved with a quiet confidence that seemed to command the room without a single word. His weathered face, partly hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, scanned the diner briefly before he settled into a booth in the far corner. The diner wasn't ready for someone like the American icon. Chaos reigned. Plates clattered, voices rose, and a toddler's wails cut through the air. The smell of burnt coffee lingered in the background. Mia tried to focus, weaving through the crowded tables, but her gaze kept drifting toward the American icon. Why was he here, in a small, run-down diner, miles from anywhere glamorous? "Excuse me, miss." A gruff voice interrupted her thoughts. A middle-aged man waved a half-eaten steak in the air. "This is cold. Can I get a new one, or what?" Mia plastered on her best customer service smile. "Of course, sir. I'll take care of it right away." Her hands were steady, but inside she felt the strain of a long shift and the weight of her reality. This diner wasn't just her job, it was her lifeline. Every dollar she earned here went toward keeping a roof over her and Jordan, her 6-year-old son. As she hurried back to the kitchen, she stole another glance at the American icon. He sat with his hat tilted low, his hands resting on the table. He wasn't looking at a menu or his phone, just observing, his presence grounding in a way that seemed out of place in the chaos around him. With the plate reheated and the customer appeased, Mia finally grabbed her notepad and headed toward the American icon's booth. Her heart thudded against her ribs. He wasn't just another traveler passing through. He was someone who'd shaped a part of her childhood. But now he was sitting in her section, and she had a job to do. "Good evening, sir," she said, forcing a calmness into her voice that she didn't feel. "What can I get started for you?" The American icon looked up, his piercing eyes meeting hers. For a moment, the din of the diner seemed to fade. "Just a coffee and a burger," he said, his tone steady and low. "Medium rare, no onions." Mia nodded, jotting it down quickly. As she turned to leave, his voice stopped her. "Busy night?" Mia hesitated, caught off guard by the American icon's question. "Busy night?" he had asked, his voice calm and steady, as if he were a long-time regular instead of a Hollywood icon. She turned back to him, mustering a polite smile despite the nervous flutter in her chest. "Not too bad," she replied, trying to sound casual. "Keeps me on my toes." The American icon nodded, his sharp eyes scanning the room before settling back on her. "You're good at this," he said. "Not many people could handle a crowd like this and still look calm." The compliment hit her like a gust of wind, unexpected and disarming. For a moment, Mia didn't know how to respond. She wasn't used to being noticed, much less by someone like him. "Thank you," she managed, her smile faltering under the weight of his gaze. "I try." The American icon leaned back in the booth, his expression unreadable. "It's more than trying," he said after a pause. "You remind me of someone." Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. Was he being polite? Did he really mean it? "Well, that's kind of you to say," she said, her voice soft. She could feel her cheeks warming, the sudden vulnerability catching her off guard. He didn't elaborate, and the silence that followed felt heavy, almost contemplative. Mia excused herself, retreating to the counter where she put in his order. As the minutes ticked by, she busied herself with clearing tables and refilling coffee cups. But her thoughts kept circling back to the American icon. There was something about him, something quiet yet commanding, that unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. Why was he here? He didn't belong in a small diner off the highway, eating a burger and drinking coffee from a chipped mug. The American icon could afford luxury, and yet he had chosen this place. She stole a glance at his booth, where he sat with an air of unbothered ease, sipping water as if he had nowhere else to be. When his order was ready, Mia carried the plate and coffee to his table. She set them down carefully, catching a brief glance of appreciation from him. "Thank you," he said simply. "You're welcome," she replied, her voice steady but softer now. She moved to another table, but her mind was anything but calm. Why had he singled her out? And what had he meant when he said she reminded him of someone? As the American icon began eating, his movements slow and deliberate, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was anything but ordinary. He wasn't just another customer. Every so often, their eyes met across the room, and he would nod, a small, silent acknowledgement that sent a strange flutter through her chest. For the first time in a long time, Mia felt seen, and it terrified her. As the dinner rush began to fade and the diner settled into a quieter hum, Mia felt the weight of the American icon's presence even more acutely. He ate slowly, almost as if savoring each bite, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos she had just endured. Every so often their eyes would meet, and his slight nod of acknowledgement sent an inexplicable flutter through her chest. When the American icon's coffee cup neared empty, he raised his hand in a subtle gesture. Mia took a deep breath and approached his booth, determined to keep her composure. "Everything all right?" she asked, her voice steady but tinged with curiosity. The American icon looked up, his sharp eyes meeting hers once again. "Perfect," he said, his tone quiet yet firm. He gestured toward his plate. "That was one of the best burgers I've had in a long time." The compliment caught her off guard, and she let out a small chuckle, her nerves momentarily easing. "I'll let the cook know. He'll be happy to hear that." For a moment, the American icon didn't say anything, and Mia felt the silence stretch between them. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It felt purposeful, like he was studying her. Finally he spoke, his voice low but full of weight. "You've got something about you, a presence. It's rare." Mia blinked, unsure how to respond. The sincerity in his tone was almost overwhelming. "Thank you," she said softly, her cheeks warming under his intense gaze. "I just try to get through the day." The American icon's lips curved into a faint smile, though his eyes held a far-off look. "That's the trick, isn't it? Just getting through?" His words hung in the air, resonating with an unspoken understanding that left Mia feeling exposed, yet somehow seen. Before she could respond, the American icon reached into his pocket and pulled out a few bills, placing them neatly on the table. Then he slid a folded piece of paper on top of the pile. "Keep the change," he said, rising from the booth, "and read this when you get a moment." Mia's eyes widened as she stared at the note. "Thank you," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. But the American icon didn't reply. He tipped his hat slightly, turned, and walked toward the door. The bell above it jingled softly as he left, and just like that, he was gone. For a moment, Mia stood frozen by the booth, her thoughts racing. What could he have possibly written? Why had he seemed so intent on her reading it? The questions swirled in her mind, but there was no time to dwell on them. The diner wasn't going to clean itself. As the evening wore on and the last customers trickled out, Mia couldn't shake the feeling that this night was far from ordinary. The folded note sat heavy in her apron pocket, a mystery waiting to be unraveled. The diner was nearly empty now, the hum of the jukebox providing a soft background melody as Mia wiped down the last few tables. Her co-workers had gone home, leaving her alone in the quiet. The folded note in her apron pocket felt heavier with each passing second, its presence impossible to ignore. She glanced around the empty diner, her pulse quickening. It was finally time. Mia slipped into the back room and sank onto the bench, her hands trembling as she pulled out the note. Carefully, she unfolded it, the crisp paper revealing words written in neat, deliberate handwriting. Her eyes scanned the first few lines and her breath hitched. "Dear Mia, I don't know much about you, but in the short time I've been here, I've seen something rare. True resilience. Watching how you manage this place with grace, even under pressure, is a reminder of how much strength exists in the everyday heroes of this world." Mia's eyes blurred with tears as she continued reading. Each word seemed to reach into her soul, touching parts of her she had long kept hidden. "You remind me of someone very dear to me, someone who taught me the value of hard work and kindness. I don't know your full story, but I can see in your eyes that you've carried more than your share of burdens. That's why I want to do something. No strings attached." Her hands shook as she turned to the folded check that had been tucked inside the note. She unfolded it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. When she saw the amount, her breath caught, and she felt her knees weaken. $10,000. Mia stared at the check in disbelief, her tears spilling freely now. She pressed a hand to her mouth, trying to stifle the sobs that threatened to escape. It wasn't just the money, though that was life-changing in itself. It was the acknowledgement, the validation, the feeling that someone had truly seen her. She forced herself to keep reading, her tears falling onto the paper. I'm leaving this small gesture for you to use however you see fit, whether it's for your child, your future, or simply a moment of rest. I hope it brings you some peace. People like you deserve to be seen, and I see you. The words struck her with a force she hadn't expected. For so long, Mia had felt invisible, like the world moved around her without ever really noticing her. But the American icon, a man she'd only ever admired from a distance, had seen her. He'd seen her struggles, her resilience, her strength, and he had chosen to acknowledge it. Mia clutched the note and the check to her chest, her mind racing. This money could change everything. It could pay off the stack of overdue bills on her kitchen counter. It could fix the leaky faucet in her apartment and replace Jordan's worn-out sneakers. It could give them a fresh start. But as overwhelming as the financial relief felt, it was the American icon's words that lingered. You remind me of someone very dear to me. Who was that person? And why had the American icon chosen her? The question swirled in her mind as she sat in the quiet back room, the check and note clutched tightly in her hands. This night had already changed her life, but it also left her with a sense of responsibility. What was she going to do with this unexpected gift? And how could she honor the faith the American icon had placed in her? Mia wiped her tears and took a deep breath. For the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't dared to hope for. A spark of possibility. Mia sat in the back room for what felt like hours, the note and check resting on the bench beside her. Her tears had dried, but the weight of what the American icon had done lingered heavily in her chest. $10,000. It was an amount that could erase months of stress, pay off overdue bills, and give Jordan a life she'd only dreamed of. But even more overwhelming than the money were the American icon's words. You deserve to be seen, and I see you. She thought back to her late father, whose encouragement had been her lifeline when times were tough. Don't let the world wear you down, kid. You've got more strength than you know, he used to say. She could almost hear his voice now, urging her to believe in herself. The American icon's note had brought those words rushing back, stirring emotions she hadn't felt in years. Her phone buzzed, breaking the stillness. It was Tasha, her best friend. Mia hesitated for a moment, then answered. Hey, Tash, Mia said, her voice shaky. What's wrong? You sound different, Tasha replied, her concern immediate. Can you come by the diner? I need to talk to you. Tasha didn't hesitate. I'll be there in 10. True to her word, Tasha arrived quickly, sliding into one of the empty booths as Mia handed her the note and check. Tasha read the letter silently, her eyes widening as she reached the end. When she saw the check, her mouth fell open. Mia, she whispered, her voice filled with awe. This is incredible. Do you even realize what this means? I don't know, Mia admitted, her voice barely audible. I don't even know why he did it. Tasha placed the note on the table and reached across to grab Mia's hands. Because he saw you. He saw the same strength and determination I've seen in you all these years. You deserve this, Mia. Don't doubt that for a second. Mia looked down at the check, her heart heavy with gratitude but also with fear. What if I mess this up? What if I don't use it the right way? You won't, Tasha said firmly. You've spent years doing everything you can for Jordan, holding your life together with duct tape and sheer willpower. This is your chance to finally breathe, to dream a little. Mia nodded, her thoughts racing. She thought about the stack of unpaid bills sitting on her kitchen counter, the leaky faucet in her apartment, and the second-hand sneakers Jordan had been wearing to school. This money could solve so many problems. But it wasn't just about fixing the present. It was about building a future. That night after her shift ended, Mia sat alone at her kitchen table. Jordan was fast asleep in his room, his soft snores the only sound in the apartment. She spread the note and check out on the table in front of her, then pulled out a notepad and pen. What could she do with this gift? She thought about enrolling in accounting classes, a dream she'd long since buried. She thought about setting up a college fund for Jordan, giving him opportunities she never had. And one thought kept coming back, louder than the others: paying it forward. Mia scribbled down her ideas, her hand moving quickly as the possibilities began to take shape. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in years, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't dared to before: hope. The next morning, sunlight streamed through the kitchen window as Mia sat sipping her coffee. The note and check lay on the table in front of her, folded neatly, as if keeping them pristine would somehow preserve their magic. She'd spent the entire night making plans, real, tangible steps toward a better life for her and Jordan. Today was the day she'd take the first step. After dropping Jordan off at school, Mia drove to the bank. Her hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, her mind racing with a mix of excitement and fear. The check felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in her purse. Would the teller question it? Would they treat her differently, seeing a check with so many zeros from someone like her? The bank was quiet when she stepped inside, her heels clicking softly against the polished floor. Mia approached the counter, her heart pounding. The teller, a young woman with a warm smile, greeted her. "How can I help you today?" Mia hesitated, then slid the check across the counter. "I'd like to deposit this." The teller's eyebrows lifted slightly as she glanced at the amount, but she quickly composed herself. "That's quite a deposit," she said with a polite smile. "It's a gift," Mia replied, her voice barely above a whisper. The teller didn't press for details, simply nodded and began processing the check. As Mia watched, a strange mix of relief and disbelief washed over her. It was real. The money was real. And now, so was the opportunity to change her life. Her next stop was the community college she had driven past countless times, always wondering what it would feel like to walk through its doors. Today, she found out, the admissions office was bustling with activity, students chatting and flipping through brochures. Mia felt out of place, older than most of the people around her, but she forced herself to keep moving. A friendly woman at the desk smiled as Mia approached. "How can I help you?" Mia took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. "I'd like to enroll in accounting classes." The woman's smile widened. "You're in the right place. Let's get started." As Mia filled out the paperwork, a flood of emotions coursed through her. Excitement, fear, and something she hadn't felt in years: pride. She was doing this. She was taking the first step toward a future she had only dreamed of. The first few days of class were challenging. Mia felt out of place among younger students who seemed more confident and better prepared. The assignments were tougher than she had expected, and balancing classes with her shifts at the diner left her exhausted. But every time she thought about giving up, the American icon's words echoed in her mind. "People like you deserve to be seen." Back at home, Jordan noticed the change in her. One evening, as she was hunched over her accounting textbook at the kitchen table, he tugged at her sleeve. "Mom," he said, his brown eyes wide with curiosity, "you're going to school now." Mia smiled, ruffling his hair. "That's right, buddy. I am." Jordan beamed. "You're going to be so smart." His pride in her fueled her determination. Even when the days felt impossibly long and her doubts crept in, Mia reminded herself why she was doing this: for Jordan, for their future, and for herself. But Mia's transformation wasn't just about her. Inspired by the American icon's generosity, she started setting aside a portion of the money for a hope fund. Her first act of paying it forward came when she overheard a struggling single mom at Jordan's school talking about not being able to buy groceries. Without saying a word, Mia slipped an envelope of cash into the woman's mailbox with a simple note: "From someone who knows how hard you're working. You're doing great." Mia's small acts of kindness didn't stop there. She helped a young waitress at the diner with her college application fees and donated anonymously to a local food pantry. Each gesture reminded her of the ripple effect the American icon's note had created in her life. Every late-night study session, every small act of giving, and every step forward was a testament to her resilience and determination. The money the American icon gave her had set her on this path, but it was her will to keep moving that would sustain her. For the first time, Mia felt like she wasn't just surviving. She was building something real. As weeks turned into months, Mia's life began to reflect the changes she had envisioned. She juggled shifts at the diner with evening accounting classes, and while the days were long and exhausting, they were also fulfilling in a way she hadn't experienced before. Each step she took reminded her of the American icon's words, "I see you." But it wasn't enough to change her own life. Mia felt compelled to pass the kindness forward. Inspired by the American icon's gesture, she made a quiet vow. For every blessing she received, she would create one for someone else. Her hope fund, small at first, had already begun to grow, and with it, her resolve to make a difference. Her first act of paying it forward came naturally. One afternoon at the diner, Mia overheard a young waitress, Kayla, talking about her struggles to afford college textbooks. The familiar weight of that struggle hit Mia hard. Without saying a word, she slipped an envelope with enough cash to cover the books into Kayla's locker. She added a note. "You're going to do amazing things. Someone believed in me, and now I believe in you." The next day, Kayla approached her, tears in her eyes. "Mia, was this from you?" Mia smiled softly but shook her head. "It doesn't matter who it's from. Just keep going." Kayla hugged her tightly, and for the first time, Mia felt the full ripple effect of the American icon's kindness. It wasn't just about the money. It was about giving someone the hope they needed to move forward. Mia's acts of generosity grew from there. She paid for groceries for a struggling single mom she knew from Jordan's school. She helped a coworker fix their car when they couldn't afford the repairs. She even set up a small anonymous fund at the local food pantry to help families in need. Each act, no matter how small, felt like a step toward honoring the gift the American icon had given her. But not everyone understood her generosity. Some of her coworkers at the diner noticed her giving spirit and began to whisper. "Must be nice to play the hero," one of them said under their breath one evening. Another added, "Guess she doesn't need her tips anymore." The words stung, but Mia refused to let them derail her. She knew they didn't understand the full story, and she didn't owe them an explanation. Tasha, her unwavering supporter, reminded her of the truth. "Let them talk, Mia. They don't know what you've been through. You're doing what's right, and that's all that matters." Jordan, too, noticed the changes in his mom. One evening, as Mia helped him with his homework, he looked up with wide, curious eyes. "Mom, why do you help so many people?" Mia smiled, her heart swelling with pride and emotion. "Because someone helped me when I needed it most," she said softly, "and the best way to thank them is by doing the same for others." Jordan nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "You're like a superhero," he said, grinning, "but for real life." Mia laughed, pulling him into a hug. "Maybe, but even superheroes need help sometimes." Though her days were filled with challenges, Mia felt a newfound sense of purpose. Each small act of kindness, each step forward in her studies, and each moment of connection with Jordan reaffirmed her belief that she was on the right path. The American icon's gesture had changed her life, but it was what she chose to do with it that truly mattered. Months had passed since the American icon had walked into the diner, and yet his presence lingered in Mia's life like an unspoken promise. The $10,000 check had transformed her world, but it was his words that stayed with her the most. "You deserve to be seen, and I see you." Those words had been a lifeline, pulling her from survival mode into a place where she could begin to dream again. Mia sat at the kitchen table one evening, her accounting textbook open in front of her. The apartment was quiet except for the occasional creak of the old pipes. Jordan was on the floor nearby, playing with his action figures. He looked up at her suddenly, his brown eyes filled with curiosity. "Mom," he asked, "do you think that man will ever come back to the diner?" The question caught her off guard. She set down her pen and leaned back in her chair, considering her answer. Would the American icon ever return? It was hard to say. His visit had felt like a one-time miracle, something so extraordinary it couldn't possibly happen again. "Maybe," she said softly, a small smile playing on her lips. "But even if he doesn't, he'll always be part of our story." Jordan nodded thoughtfully, seemingly satisfied with her answer. He went back to his toys, but Mia's thoughts lingered on his question. The American icon's kindness had given her so much more than financial security. It had given her hope, confidence, and a renewed sense of purpose. His gesture had set her life on a new trajectory, and she was determined to honor it by building a legacy of her own. At the diner, Mia approached each shift with a newfound perspective. She greeted every customer with warmth and grace, knowing that even the smallest interaction could change a person's day or their life. When a tired truck driver thanked her for the best coffee he'd had in weeks, she smiled and thought of the American icon. When a struggling young mother tipped her with loose change and an apologetic smile, Mia quietly returned the kindness by covering part of her bill. One evening, as Mia wiped down the counter after closing, she paused to reflect on how far she had come. She wasn't just working to get by anymore. She was working towards something greater. Her accounting classes were going well, and she had even started to enjoy the challenge. Jordan often sat beside her while she studied, his presence a constant reminder of why she was pushing herself so hard. But it wasn't just about her or Jordan anymore. The American icon's gesture had taught her the power of seeing others, of recognizing their struggles and lifting them up. It was a lesson she carried with her every day, and she had made it her mission to keep that ripple of kindness alive. One afternoon, as Mia balanced her shifts in her studies, she received a call from the community college. She had been selected for a small scholarship thanks to a recommendation from one of her professors who had noticed her dedication. The news brought tears to her eyes. For the first time, she felt like her efforts were being recognized, not just by the American icon, but by the world around her. That night, after Jordan went to bed, Mia sat at the same kitchen table where she had once felt so overwhelmed by life's challenges. But now she felt something entirely different. Pride. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. And she knew the American icon's kindness had been the spark that ignited that change. As she closed her textbook and prepared for bed, she thought about the legacy she was building, one small act at a time. The American icon's gesture had taught her that even the simplest kindness could create ripples far beyond what anyone could see. And now it was her turn to carry that lesson forward, ensuring that the chain of compassion would never end.